my listeners. This is Mubilu Musoke with Democratization in Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective. Today, however, I'm going to address two themes. The first is a message to seducer. To seguja, not seducer. And the second part will address the issue of homosexuality and the law of homosexuality in Uganda. The reason why I have a message for Seguja and others like him is because he raised a very important issue last week when he called in. My conversations, as I have pointed out before, are comparative, and the comparative component is very important. And what Seguja said, or the issue he raised, is very, very important in this comparative perspective of democratization. My conversation today on democratization anticipated actually the reactions that came from Seguja last week. That is why I prefaced my earlier conversations with a discussion of classic social theory consisting of the capital theory by Karl Marx, the culture theory by Max Weber, the labor theory by Emile Durkheim, and the social contract theory by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The reason for this approach or methodology is the assumption that all knowledge resides in valid theory. Invalid theory is equivalent to ideology. Invalid theories, like ideologies, distort or pervert knowledge. The history of science tells us this much. That is why in these conversations I have made an effort to distinguish between political philosophy and ideology. Ideology is sterile or dogmatic philosophy. It distorts facts in the same way as invalid theory does. Take capital theory as an example. Capital theory produced an ideology known as Marxism. The Marxist concept of imperialism is part of Marxist ideology. Lenin's book, Capitalism, the highest stage of imperialism, is the best historic example to illustrate this point I'm trying to make. The assumption by Marxist ideology was that all imperialism was by its nature capitalist and therefore Western in its origin, and also it must be rejected by non-Westerners or the people who are not from the West. That is a dogmatic ideological argument. that ideological conclusion was wrong for several reasons. First, like all ideologies, it is reductionist. That is, it assumes that all imperialism must be capitalist and therefore must originate from the West, where capitalism originated. Therefore, Western influence must be resisted at any price for the simple reason that it is from the West. Probably that's why Seguja thinks that Africans must limit their horizons to the African world and avoid any contact or relationship with the West, and especially American imperialism or influence. This ideological reductionism is obviously false because history has rendered it obsolete. It ignores Chinese imperialism and, even worse, the possibility of African imperialism. What China is doing in Africa by promoting Chinese interests, for example, by buying oil in Sudan, Angola, and Uganda, is not less imperialistic than the American promotion of interests for the Americans in the same places. Moreover, technology is technology, whether it is from US, China, or Japan. Even worse, however, is the fact that they are African leaders like Museveni and Nyerere who have been imperialistic in the classic sense of imperialism as exemplified by Lenin in his book, Imperialism. Uganda's plundering of Congo's resources, which resulted in the International Court of Justice judgment of $10 billion in damages to Congo against Uganda, was as imperialistic as any imperialism can be. Seguja, please take note of that fact. Similarly, Nyerere behaved imperialistically in Uganda in 1979 when he overthrew Yusuf Lule from power, in the same way as the Soviet Union and US promoted their interests by using interventionist coup d'etats in Congo and Ethiopia, respectively. Therefore, Seguja's declaration that we do not want American constitutional doctrines simply because they are tainted by American imperialism is based on an invalid theory or ideology of imperialism. Moreover, who are the we Seguja is talking about? Were Chinese ideas of communes imported to Tanzania by Nyerere as Ujamaa Village Project, which miserably failed in the 1980s, less imperialistic than the importation of American jurisprudence, which is found to be useful and effective in promoting the human rights of minorities? Seguja must understand one fundamental fact in the story of Leninist concept of imperialism. It is based on an invalid social theory which was repudiated by history in the 1990s when communism was abandoned by USSR to become Russia. Russia today, as a result, is a capitalist country, irrespective of Lenin's theory of imperialism. The failure of Ujamaa village projects in Tanzania can validly be explained by the invalidity of the capital theory Lenin depended on to formulate his invalid theory of or ideology of imperialism. The question, therefore, is why is the importation of the doctrine of supremacy of the Constitution from U.S. to Africa and other parts of the world thrived rather than failed, similar to the importation of a one-party system and Ujamaa villages from China to Tanzania by Nyerere? The simple answer is that the theory on which a one-party system and Ujamaa villages were based in China and Tanzania was invalid. The theory has been repudiated in Russia by a conclusive historical event. Just as the labor theory was repudiated by the end of colonialism and the abolition of apartheid, there is a close connection between historical and invalid theories. The theory of imperialism, which is an ideological component of the capital theory, is also invalid after its repudiation in USSR for the same reasons. Seguja, therefore, needs not to worry about American imperialism if the theoretical premises on which protecting minority rights in the Constitution is based are invalid. The importation of the doctrine of supremacy of the Constitution to Africa or elsewhere will eventually fail if they are based on an invalid theory. If they are not, they will not fail, and it doesn't matter what Seguja says. If the theory is valid, what Seguja should share what about is the effective implementation of the doctrine of the supremacy of the Constitution. If our explanation is valid, then it follows that no matter what anybody says, history will continue its normal course. No invalid theories or ideological postulates will change the course of world history. Lenin's and Mao's bodies are certainly moving in their graves. Threatening to eliminate Mubilu, as Seguja said, from the course of African liberation will have no effect. It certainly will not deter Mubilu from proclaiming the truth as he sees it. Good luck to Seguja. Only people with a dictator's mentality threaten force or use terrorism to silence the views they disagree with. I appreciate Seguja's contribution to this debate, controversial as it may be. As far as I'm concerned, dissemination of knowledge should not be deterred by utterance of vindictive threats which have no useful role in a free discussion of ideas. This comment leads to the controversial topic of my conversation today, namely the prohibition of homosexuality in Uganda. The invalid theory of imperialism may seem to be far removed from the homosexuality debate, but in fact, the two are closely related. As far as some people are concerned, there are 2 points we must point out in this context. First, many people opposed to homosexuality in Uganda cite foreign influence or even imperialism as the enemy which must be confronted by enacting the homosexual law. Second, the homosexuals are a minority group, not only in Uganda, but in the whole world, whose rights can only be protected by that powerful constitutional doctrine of the supremacy of the Constitution, which we talked about last week. Rationality in the homosexual debate can only be measured by a valid theory of its causation. We cannot rationally legislate about homosexuality without understanding its nature and causes. What is homosexuality? What causes it? Is it inherently bad? Should it be prohibited? Or people punished by life imprisonment or even death when committed? These are some of the questions we have to answer truthfully and scientifically. Before we can answer these questions, we should have the original facts related to the questions asked. What are the questions of fact related to these questions? The first and most important question is the causation of homosexuality. What causes homosexuality? Do we know the causes of homosexuality, or are we speculating? Are we speculating on this issue, or are we relying on faithful norms, traditional norms, to answer these questions? There are 3 sources of traditional norms which I am referring to in this context. These are morality, culture, and religion. Historically, history alone can assure us that in the process of evolution of human society, morality is the most ancient of these 3 traditional sources of norms. The only question we have to ask is, what caused the existence of the original moral norms which may have prohibited homosexuality? The answer seems to be in the basic human instinct of survival. Human beings, especially parents, religiously believed in their mortality. The only way they could suspend or even wipe out their mortality was through reproduction. Therefore, obviously, since homosexuality would lead to mortality, it would be and was prohibited by morality. Such a message could not fail to go through an entire community. Morality was obviously designed to serve the survival of the species, but its rationality was minimal. Morality can therefore be seen as, to some extent, a biological element of survival of the species. If this is true, then how does it enhance the survival of the species? It does so by the mere fact of prohibiting homosexuality. Until it is prohibited, unless it is prohibited and perceived to be prohibited, it is a negative factor in the survival of the species, one has to assume. This inevitably leads to the other species. In one of my arguments with friends about homosexuality, one question raised is, how come other animals do not practice homosexuality? So, therefore, logically, human beings should be prohibited from practicing homosexuality because other animals do not do it, do not practice homosexuality. The answer to this question may seem difficult, but science has a satisfactory answer for it. Animal sexuality is triggered automatically by biological signals. That is why rape is practically inconceivable in the animal kingdom. The female animal, when ready to mate, always triggers the process by emitting certain scents, which the male sniffs and thereby gets ready to mate with the female. These triggers are always within the same species. A dog cannot trigger a goat or a sheep, and vice versa. Since males are incapable of emitting these scents, these biological signals that turn on the mating behavior, there can be no homosexual behavior among the animals. So the answer is obvious and very scientific too. It means that there can be no rape among animals because there is no signal, biological signal, to trigger the mating process. Human beings are different. They have evolved a much more complicated brain with advanced imagination than ordinary animals. One can add that human beings are more creative. That is why they have developed the traditional social norms beyond the rudimentary beginnings in other animals in order to organize society, such as morality that requires the wearing of clothes, culture that stipulates the rules for marriage, or religion that commands specific ways of worshiping God. Now, let us deal with the homosexuality itself. It would appear that almost all societies prohibit homosexuality, and they regard homosexuality as taboo. People knew it, but people knew that homosexuality actually took place, but regarded it, homosexuality as an unspeakable act, condemned but rarely punished. Even when laws were legislated against homosexuality, an arrest and a trial for homosexuals was a very rare event. The explanation is that consenting adults could not be prosecuted, because in order to convict anyone for a homosexual act, one had to have evidence and corroboration of that evidence from independent sources. Except in the rare case, the apparently stupid case of the Chris Mubilu in Uganda, who videotaped the acts of homosexuality he was performing. It was difficult to convict anybody except when the actors were caught in the act itself, which was a very rare situation. Legislating against homosexuality is like legislating against adultery. You can prohibit the act, but you can hardly enforce the law, since the violators cannot accuse each other of the commission of that crime. In England in the 1950s, they came up with a recommendation that homosexuality between consenting adults should be decriminalized, allowed to between consenting adults. Science, in the form of psychiatry, assumed that homosexuality was a mental disease which could be cured by psychotherapy. Sigmund Freud is known, the famous psychiatrist. In his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, assumed that homosexuality, like other mental illnesses, was the result of early childhood trauma that could be uncovered by a psychotherapist on a couch by interrogating the patient's early experiences in life. Now we know that the brain of the homosexuals is anatomically different from that of straight people. Therefore, Freud was mistaken. Where does this put the recent legislation in Uganda? I'll take a short break now, and I'll come back with an answer to that question. Thank you very much. After a short break, I'm back to discuss the Anti-Homosexuality Act enacted into law in Uganda, but not yet signed by the president. Well, the president seems to have having second thoughts about the signing of the anti-homosexual act. First of all, he said that the members of parliament rushed the bill, the passing of the bill. But this bill was formulated in 2009. So it means that it has been in parliament for at least 4 years. It was sitting in parliament. The president knew about it, and the cabinet knew about it. So to say that the people rushed it, this is another Musevenist kind of excuse, which is the same as telling lies to the nation. To me, that means that Museveni is having second thought. Another person who has come out against it is a religious leader, Malay, who has repudiated his original stand. He supported the law against the Anti-Homosexual Act, but now he's coming out against it. He's arguing that it should not be, the president should not sign it. So the controversy continues. But the law, however, is a very strange legislation, very, very strange, because it talks about aggravated homosexuality or aggravated acts of homosexuality. A person commits aggravated homosexuality where, one, the person against whom the offense is committed is below the age of 18, and so on and so on. There are so many provisions that sometimes don't even make sense. Any act, sexual act, well, against any person below 18 is always rape, and it's punished. It doesn't even have to be a homosexual act to be punished under the law. So you don't need this homosexual law to make that illegal. Any sexual act between a person with a person who is below 18, that, you know, in normal legal language is called defilement, and that the law for defilement is there. And in any case, homosexual act is already illegal under the penal code. So this law is somehow motivated by grounds other than simply to punish homosexuality, because there is a law already in the penal code which punishes homosexuality. So it's not clear again why this act was enacted. It also prohibits aiding and abetting homosexuality. You know, aiding and abetting an illegal act anyway is already covered under the law. Aiding and abetting a criminal act is already a criminal act. You don't need a homosexual law to punish anybody for that. And it also deals with same-sex marriage. It prohibits people, a person who purports to contract a marriage with another person of the same sex commits the offense of homosexuality and shall be liable on conviction to imprisonment for life. So this law is strange, stranger than strange. The other aspect of the law is that it declares itself to have extraterritorial jurisdiction. So it means that if you were Ugandan and you commit homosexual acts outside of Uganda, they can still come try to get you. Section 16, for example, provides that this act, the homosexual act, the law, shall apply to offenses committed outside Uganda, where a person who, while being a citizen or permanently residing in Uganda, commits an act outside Uganda which would act or constitute an offense under this act, and had it been committed in Uganda, or B, the offense was committed partly outside and partly inside Uganda. So the details in which it goes to deal with these criminal acts, so-called criminal acts, is very, very strange. But to what extent you can enforce this law, especially this extraterritorial jurisdiction? I mean, how are they can't even, how many homosexuals within Uganda have they caught and convicted? You have to ask. I raised this issue that a law, the homosexual, the law against homosexuality is like the law against the adultery. It's very, very difficult to enforce because you have to, people committing adultery are not going to go to court and accuse each other of that crime, and you can hardly prosecute. How many, the adultery is a crime almost in all countries. But how many people have you seen being in court? Is it because this crime is never committed? No. And the same with the homosexuality. I mean, how many people have you seen being charged? The only strange thing was in Malaysia. Remember the former prime minister who was accused of a homosexual act, but that was politics. That the only reason they accused that former Malaysian prime minister was politics. So apparently, even in Uganda, that's what they are going to do. I mean, if beyond the politics, there is no way you are going to arrest two adults committing homosexual acts in secret. There is no way you're going to enforce that law. So it's a strange legislation in its content and on its face. The other issue I wanted to raise is the other strange thing. I'm not going to go into these details. The way they define these acts, the homosexual act, the lesbian acts, they go into very minute details in defining them. It's even things like touching the so-called private parts, just touching. It is part of the of this legislation. How are you going to enforce all this? I mean, it's ridiculous. And unless somebody, as I said, unless it is used as a political weapon, as it was used in Indonesia, Malaysia, you're wasting time, because you will never catch anybody, and accuse them of violating this act that somebody, touched a man's or woman's, it's the same-sex private part. I mean, it is ridiculous. So this law is strange to that extent. Whether the president is going to sign it or not, I don't know. But in any case, even if he signs it, he's wasting time, because I can assure you they are not going to catch many people, except the stupid ones like Chris Mubilu, who videotaped himself and then published it in the videotape. That's the only way you can judge somebody, by when you have pictures of that person performing that act. So it's a waste of time. The other aspect already, which has been in the news, is the young man who was killed while the policemen were watching. That is a violation of rule of law. Now let us briefly talk about rule of law. Rule of law simply means that you enforce the law, and all people are subject to that law, and it applies equally to everyone. That's equality before the law. But this incident where a young man was killed violently while the police was looking was a violation of the rule of law, because the police have a duty under the Police Act to prevent acts of violence, to prevent criminal acts, and they have a responsibility to arrest a person who is committing an act which is illegal, like the way that those people hit that young man until he died. Those were criminal acts, and the police was just there looking. And the best I can do is to advise those people, the relatives of that they can sue the state, they can sue the government, because the police was there and contravened. They did not enforce the law as they are required under the Police Act. When somebody is committing a crime in their view, that's a phrase which always is put to law students, when a provision which says when a person commits a criminal act in your view. In your view doesn't mean in your opinion. It means when you are looking at it, when you are watching it. The killing of this young man was done in the view of the police. So the police, by failing to take action to save this guy, violated their duty under the Police Act, and therefore the relatives can sue this man for wrongful death because the rule of law requires that everybody should be equally protected by the law and the police. This, by the way, brings out one of those issues which we will deal with later on under international law. The homophobia or homophobia, homophobia, the act of either being hating people who are homosexuals, or victimizing them, or this has happened even here in the United States. There is a young man who committed suicide, and because he was exposed by a friend of his, and these acts, homophobic acts, are very are a violation of the rule of law, of individual rights, of people being left alone, and it violates their freedom. So now this specific incident of the young man who was killed while the police was looking is a very, very, I think, a very good case to prosecute. I mean, to sue the government for, because it can send a message to the police and to the public that actually it's not allowed to kill people simply because you suspect that they are involved or they do things you don't like. If we went around killing people, punishing people who do things we don't like, who would be able to survive? Somebody could come up with something which others say that's terrible. Therefore you should be stoned to death or something like that, and that would make society very, very a very dangerous place to be. So the relatives of this young man have a very, very, very good case in my opinion, because the police is under an obligation to prevent a crime which is committed in their view. But they just, were just watching like they were spectators of a sport, which was not really a sport. And the government has a responsibility too to protect lives, the security of the individual. You cannot say, oh, that one is a homosexual, therefore he can be violently attacked, and so on and so on. The other aspect we can look at this homosexuality, anti-homosexual act in Uganda is from the perspective of international law. There are many conventions, for example, a convention against racism, a convention against discrimination against women, a convention discriminating. Right now, we have a movement. Recently, in 2012, the United Nations body in Geneva, they published a report, a very, very comprehensive report regarding the homosexuals, the protection of and the people with the who are different, either homosexuals, gays, lesbians, and people with a different gender. What the international the body, the human rights, the UN Commission in Geneva has published a report which is very, very extensive, covering all aspects of discrimination against anybody based on either their sex, their gender, their sexuality, or any aspect whatsoever of difference from other people. No more. I shouldn't use the word normal, because any act can be actually a normal act depending on how you look at it. The international law right now, as it stands, there is no convention as such to prohibit, but there is a very strong movement, a movement towards the prohibition of laws like the Uganda has just enacted. And I think before long, because about 60 countries in the world have approved this statement by the UN committee in Geneva, a statement which is very, very, very strong, which means that if you have about 60 countries which approve, not approve the protection of homosexuals and people cross genders and so on. If you have 60 countries in favor of such an international norm, that means that actually that there are very few countries where these homosexual laws are actually approved. So, judging from history, it means that the trend, if it continues, will lead to, I think, in my opinion, the passing of a convention that supports the enactment, the passing of a convention, an international convention to prohibit the punishment of homosexuality. Excuse me, I'm trying to look up a document. Let me take a short break now, and I'll be back and with that document. Thank you.
Radio eno ekolaganira wamu n'ekibiina ekya Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda, FADU. Ebigendererwa by'ekibiina kino kuzza mirembe, enkolagana ey'awamu, obwenkanya, okuggyawo enkola y'omwana waani, n'okusosola mu mawanga, okutulugunya, okulya enguzi, ebikudde ejjembe mu Uganda. Era kirwanirira okuzza enfuga eya demokrasiya mu Uganda. Ekibiina kino kye kisookedde ddala okukubiriza buli muntu yenna okukyegattako awatali kusosola mu mawanga n'enzikiriza oba ekitundu omuntu kyalimu mu nsi yonna. Kino kye kiseera twegatte tusobole okuzza obupya ensi yaffe Uganda edobonkanyizibwa. Buli eyandyagadde okwegatta ku kibiina kya FADU kuba ennamba eno: 1 4 8 4 9 not 4 7 not 3 8 oba weeyambise email info@fadu.org. Radio eno ekolaganira wamu n'ekibiina ekya Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda, FADU. Ebigendererwa by'ekibiina kino kuzza mirembe, enkolagana ey'awamu, obwenkanya, okuggyawo enkola y'omwana waani, n'okusosola mu mawanga, okutulugunya, okulya enguzi, ebikudde ejjembe mu Uganda. Era kirwanirira okuzza enfuga eya demokrasiya mu Uganda. Ekibiina kino kye kisookedde ddala okukubiriza buli muntu yenna okukyegattako awatali kusosola mu mawanga n'enzikiriza oba ekitundu omuntu kyalimu mu nsi yonna. Kino kye kiseera twegatte tusobole okuzza obupya ensi yaffe Uganda edobonkanyizibwa. Buli eyandyagadde okwegatta ku kibiina kya FADU kuba ennamba eno 1 4 8 4 9 not 4 7 not 3 8 oba weeyambise email info@fadu.org.
You are listening to Voice of Uganda Radio, the mouthpiece of all Ugandans, wherever they may be, to voice their problems without fear of any retribution. The Voice of Uganda Radio works in sync with FADU, the Federalist Alliance of Democracy and Development in Uganda. FADU is an organization that was formed to work as a platform for all Ugandans at home and outside, to work synergistically to liberate our mother Uganda from the ruthless invaders that have sucked it dry. Therefore, FADU invites all able Ugandans to act now and save the Ugandan humanity that is being slaughtered, destroyed, and robbed by a few people unworthy to call themselves Ugandans. Many people are crying for action in Uganda as they languish in misery. FADU echoes their cries by making the loudest alarm to everyone to join FADU, not tomorrow or the next day, but today. The number to join is 408-904-7038. The email is info@fadu.org.
Yes, I'm back to discuss the issues of homosexuality. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a document which we legally under international law now is regarded as the source of customary international law. That, in other words, it means that that it is applicable without any form of legislation. That is, by looking at the behavior of countries. And I was talking about if 60 or more countries in the world adopt a policy which prohibits the prosecution of homosexuality, that could amount to a customary rule evolving. But let me quote you the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Now, that is a very important statement because although it was written in 1948, before even the debate on homosexuality became popular. But when you read that statement, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. can be used to argue that actually the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with that statement in Article 1, protects people of different homosexuality or sexual orientation is the term I want. People with a different sexual orientation. Now, if all people are supposed to be born free and equal in dignity, and then why should you punish or discriminate against the homosexuals, the lesbians? Now, the United Nations document I was trying to refer to is called Born Free and Equal, and I think they take that very title from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I just read to you, and it is very clear. In this document, it deals with what they call the 5 core legal obligations of states with respect to protecting the human rights of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and bisexual persons. So this book deals with in great detail. It looks at the background, and since it was written by the...
We have a call.
Yeah.
Yes, good morning, or good afternoon, actually. This is Chiwanuka Lawrence in Sereko.
Yes, sir.
I am calling with a question, and maybe I can pick your legal mind. If the international law requires that laws must be uniform and they cannot be based on one's race, religious affiliation, gender, or sexual orientation, if and when a parliamentary body enacts such a law as the homosexuality law in Uganda, which targets a sexual section of our society, doesn't that particular law fly directly in the face of the Constitution? Can such a law be sustained as constitution?
Well,
that is
that's
my
a very good
best question.
And if you remember last week, we were discussing this issue of the supremacy of the Constitution when Seguja called in made his comment about that. Yeah, the Constitution of Uganda is the supreme law. Mm-hmm. Now, the question that arises is whether that law, the one, the homosexual law, contravenes any of the sections of the Constitution. And human rights are protected. Freedom, for example, is protected by the Constitution. Maybe let me also cite, first of all, Article 20 of the Constitution. It says that human rights are inherent. They are not granted by the state. Now, that is a very important right there. I've discussed this provision earlier on when we are talking about the 1995 Constitution. That provision would seem to say that any human right is protected under the Constitution, and the state cannot deny you that right. The only problem is the interpretation of that provision. We have a judiciary, and we'll be coming to this later on when we are looking at specific decisions by the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court. The composition of the judiciary, especially the Constitutional Court, in my opinion, is such that it may not extend the interpretation of human right to homosexual rights. This is my speculation. The reason why I'm speculating like that is because right now the decisions of both the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court of Uganda are not founded, they are not anchored into a specific political philosophy. For example, a philosophy of liberty for everybody. It does not. When you read the decisions, they make decisions ad hoc. Remember, I think 3 weeks ago, I analyzed the political philosophy of the conservative wing of the Supreme Court, and the two philosophies of textualism. In other words, interpreting laws depending on the content of the text and supposedly getting meaning out of that. And also originalism. Originalism means what was the original the original legislator intend by that provision. Now, if you apply at least you can predict how the conservative Supreme Court justices how they may interpret a specific provision given their political philosophy. In Uganda, we don't have such a political philosophy. These people who are appointed, most of them actually, as a matter of fact, tend to be NRM cadres. And as NRM cadres, they have a tendency to think and to reason as NRM people would reason and think. And I think if the composition of the parliament of Uganda is any piece of evidence we can rely on, I think the way the mentality of the judges is very much similar to the mentality and the reasoning of the members of parliament who enacted this law. So I can bet that when, for example, you go to the Constitutional Court and say this homosexual law violates the rights, the rights of the homosexuals protected under the Constitution, I think the reasoning is going to be that the original the people who enacted the Constitution, did they intend to grant, to approve the rights of the gays and the lesbians and so on and so on? And the chances are, and this is speculative, of course, chances are you are going to have probably 3 out of the 5 justices on the Constitutional Court voting to say that homosexual acts were not covered as human rights. That's my speculation, because of the way the current judiciary tends to think. But in reality, though, I would make a much more strong case by going to international law, as I was trying to do, that if international law approves the rights of the homosexuals, then and Uganda is subject to international law, then international law overrides even what the Constitution says. And therefore, in that respect, you can argue that the last place of refuge for the people with the different sexual orientation is going to be eventually international law rather than the constitutions, because I'm not so sure that even here in the United States that you can have enough votes on the Supreme Court to protect the rights of all homosexual acts. Of course, the Supreme Court has already declared same-sex marriage as not prohibited by law. They struck down DOMA. DOMA, as you know, recent. I think last year it's very recent. So the Supreme Court here said same-sex marriage is permissible. As to whether they were approving the act of homosexuality or not, that's not all that clear. But obviously, when you say that same-sex marriage is protected by the Constitution, logically it follows that you cannot punish homosexuality. In Uganda, we're in a different a state of affairs. When you look at the court, the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court, I doubt that the justices in Uganda are likely to come up with a similar ruling in the case of Uganda.
Okay. So here is my follow-up question, and this regards the sister act relating to pornography, because in there there's an attempt by the law to define pornography, and as you know, in the Stewart case here in the U.S., the judge said that I know pornography when I see it. But in the case of Uganda, they attempt to do so, and they say any cultural practice, form of behavior, or form of communication, or leisure activity that depicts a person engaged in explicit sexual activities or conduct, erotic behavior, and is intended to cause sexual excitement or indecent act or behavior intended to corrupt morals. Now, they don't define morals for one, and we don't know whose morals are going to be binding in relation to this law. But my primary concern is directed towards the term cultural practice. The law seems to be targeting communities by saying cultural practices, because if it was targeting individual behavior, in my understanding, it would have said individual behavior or individual practice, but it says cultural practices. And here my worry is towards cultural celebrations. Let's say the ding ding dance, which is a dance from Acholi, which is basically meant to be done by women welcoming warriors back from war and attracting them to women they should marry. So in a way that is evoking sexual desires, it has some erotic behavior. In the case of Baganda, during weddings, there is a particular dance that is performed, which is called Embaga dance. And in there are elements where there are some form of expressed dances that might be construed to lead to sexual eroticism. The same goes to the Bagisu with the Mbalu dance, and so on and so forth within our cultures in Uganda. Now, I'm just wondering, whose morals, who is going to decide which dance is moralful and which dance is not moralful and is going to cause sexual excitement? This is my concern. Is there a way such cultural practices, which many are very sexually expressed, are going to be safeguarded from this law? Or if one of the members, and we know it's people who are claiming to be more Christian than Christ himself within the government structures who are pushing these laws, are they going to come up and object to some of these dances? Because we have seen that some of these individuals have gone as far as not giving their children local names. They are naming them names like Suvi, which is hope, names like kindness, which says God is kindness. They are giving their children names like Trust to Mwesije. So I'm really personally concerned what is going to happen to the core elements of some of these cultures when this overbearing, and I'm sorry to say, right extremist wing Christian political approach is being implemented.
Yeah. Well, I share your concern, and I appreciate your argument very much. Let me point out two very important things about all these issues, and that's relativity. Pornography, for example, there are things today which explicit and sexual which may not be regarded as pornographic, depending on one's definition. the pornographers, you pointed out that the judge said that he knows it when he sees it. The real meaning in there was that it's not easy to reach an objective decision about these issues. That, as a matter of fact, in the U.S., they leave the community to decide to determine the standards for applying these laws, like pornographic laws, for example. They leave the community to determine those standards. The issue is whether in Uganda, as you pointed out, where you have a multiplicity of cultures and different ways of expressing those cultural practices, whether you can ever come up with a single definition of what is acceptable under the law. This reminds me another international aspect of this issue. We have a provision in our constitution, especially in where the protection of human rights is concerned. We have a provision which says what is deemed acceptable in a free and democratic society. That now, when you apply that, we will be actually talking about those standards. What is a free and democratic standard? What is acceptable in a free and democratic society? That's the test of applying some of these laws. Especially the freedom of expression, freedom of association. If it is acceptable in a free and democratic society, then it is constitutional. But I have a feeling that in the case of Uganda, the society as a whole has yet to undergo some form of transformation in order to embrace a standard that is that covers most of these rights, the enjoyment of these rights, whether they are political freedom, liberty, or enjoying the right of the individual to dress as they like. It's very, very difficult to come up with a fixed, objective definition of these concepts. And that's why the courts always, even here in the United States, the courts have always struggled to define these standards. And so I wouldn't be surprised if our courts find it also very difficult to define these standards. But for a lawyer, my obligation would be to convince them to adopt the widest possible interpretation of that standard. Simply because society changes, society cannot remain static, and you can imagine, for example, during the Queen Victoria's time in England, women used to dress in a particular way. Now, if you put Queen Victoria in, and you made her wear Hillary Clinton's pantsuit, it would be obscene to see Queen Victoria wearing Hillary Clinton's suit. But today it is not, it is not outrageous. In fact, it is acceptable. But when you look back, just not a long time ago, not many people even wanted to see ladies wearing pants, and they thought this was obscene. And I remember, let me give you an example of a relative of mine. I was very young. We were performing a play at the end of the school term, and one of the teachers, who was a woman, and this is in the 60s, and she performed. She was she was performing again as a teacher, and when she came out wearing pants, her father-in-law immediately stood up and left the room. He could not stomach looking at her daughter-in-law wearing pants, because normally she would wear dresses and all that. But when she appeared on the stage performing a play wearing pants, the father-in-law had to walk out of the room. So, I'm giving you this personal example because it has remained in my memory, and because for this old guy, it was obscene to see his daughter-in-law wearing pants, and so he had to quit and he had to get out of it immediately. He couldn't dare look at her twice. He was, he left the room. So the same, we can say that people have these attitudes are going to be there, and it's going to be very difficult to come up with a general standard that is applicable. And in this particular context, again, I think our final place of refuge should be the international community, international law. And if chances are that the local legislators and the local judges are going to be strict, are going to apply standards which we disagree with, unless we can cite an international norm and say that is what is acceptable in a free and democratic society, and therefore it should be honored. It is going to be a very, very, very tough situation to deal with. When it comes to this other issue you talked about of corruption, of morals, nothing can be more vague and subjective than that, because as you pointed out yourself, whose morals? Morality, after all, does not remain static. Morality keeps on changing, and as society changes. So the corruption of morals, or even the definition of what is indecent and what is decent, is very, 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 very relative and very difficult to come up with an objective standard. Fortunately, this is we have a common law system, and the virtues of a common law system is that the judges keep on interpreting the law from case to case, And even one decision cannot be a final decision, because when the court composition of the court changes, it can change that very definition of the decision of a precedent. It can be changed as the composition of the court it changes. But I can assure you that the concept of corruption of morals is going to give headaches to any judge, any judiciary, regardless of its composition. It's not something that is going to be easy to interpret. Cultures change. Cultures also vary. This reminds me again, Segudia's concept of imperialism. What is imperialism? Some people are going to reject certain things or behavior simply because they are from the West. Because it is from the West, then but it's a double-edged sword on the other hand, because when you look at our societies in Africa, there is a lot of influence from Hollywood, the movie industry. It's a cultural, movies are part of culture. And I remember even when we were in secondary schools and we were, putting on shows and acting, performing, and we were influenced by John Wayne. You could, coming up with a pistol and trying to shoot somebody, and the world, the way it is constituted today, and the influence from outside is you cannot stop it completely. You can try to limit it and pass laws like the Uganda Parliament is trying to pass, but eventually I don't think you can avoid the influence from outside. Definitely not in the impact of globalization which we have today. The film industry has a big impact on how people behave and what they do. Let me probably give you another example before I leave this topic. In England, people use their flag, the British flag, to make bikinis and the underpants and all that, and people walk around on the beach wearing bikinis and whatever those pants you wear when you go to the beach, wearing wearing the national flag. For some, it is very offensive. How can you do? How dare you use the national flag and make a bikini out of it and sit on the sand on the beach? But I remember that it was controversial even here in the United States, and they didn't want anybody making underpants or bikinis out of the flag because you are dishonoring the flag. But the British don't mind about it. So these things are relative, and we are just going to learn how to live and survive them as the way they are. And as I said, our final refuge is going to be in international law, because that's the highest standard you can ever conceive. Because for example, when the General Assembly of the United Nations is discussing some of these issues, for example, this issue of sexuality, there was recently in 2009, I think, the General Assembly passed a resolution on the sexuality of individuals, the sexual orientation, the acceptance of any protection of any sexual orientation and gender identity as a part of the protection of international human rights law. So when that happens, I think then we may have some reprieve from our dictators who would rather prohibit everything they think is not to their taste. And so I think hopefully I have answered your question, but I want to again emphasize this issue, the obligations of the states with respect. This document passed by the Human Rights Committee in Geneva, it has 5 core legal obligations of the states with respect to protecting the human rights of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and other persons. It deals with protecting individuals from homophobic and transphobic violence. The young man who was killed in Uganda recently, I'm sure suffered violence and died because of this idea of homophobic acts by people who could not just stomach the idea that a person who is gay can have any freedom to live a life he desires. The other aspect of this document from Geneva deals with prevention of torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment of lesbians, gays, and bisexual persons. It also deals, even more importantly, it deals with, it tries to decriminalize homosexuality. Now, if international law can decriminalize homosexuality, then definitely any country that would prohibit it would be violating this international standard. But as I pointed out earlier, we have not yet reached the stage where, although I think we are inching there, we are going there, we inevitably are going to be there, of having a convention, an international convention, and for that matter, a UN convention, which protects lesbians, gays, and bisexual people with bisexual orientations. The document again also prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, this is a new concept, gender identity. This is not a very well-known thing. It is not homosexuality. It is not lesbianism. Gender identity is a complex thing. It's a person who is born, maybe born male, and later on discovers that actually he prefers being a woman. And are you going to prevent them from achieving that goal? Is that part of their human right? In my opinion, a person should be free to change their gender. I mean, first of all, it hurts nobody. By the way, that is a very good, important test in determining whether or not an act should be lawful. If an act like homosexuality is not harmful to anybody else except those who are engaged in it, why should anybody else bother about it? Because it is not like something that is dangerous to anybody else except those who are involved in it. So why should you prohibit it? I mean, if it is practiced on children, yeah, that's wrong. After all, the children should be protected. But if these are consenting adults, I don't see why anybody should prohibit such an act. The last 50, one of the core legal obligations of the states is to respect freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. And that, of course, the implication there is if the gays come out on the streets and say we are gay and we want these rights, they should be free. They should have the same right as any as a political group or a women's group or a men's group or whatever. So these rights are very extensive and far reaching in their scope, and so what the people involved are supposed to do is to make sure that the states, to make sure that these people, the people of different sexual orientation, have their rights are protected. You cannot do it in Uganda with the anti-homosexual act, which is, as I pointed out at the beginning, is very ridiculous in its details of what it prohibits and even why it prohibits it. So it's going to be, the road ahead seems to be very rough, and I don't think it's going to be an easy ride to go through in the future, to go through for people of different sexual orientation in Uganda. I think their rights are going to be restricted. However, if international law recognizes these rights, I don't think a state should prohibit them. The only problem, of course, is the issue is political, is one of mobilization. And we have to educate people to recognize their rights, to appreciate that even if you don't agree with what other people are doing, they have a right to do it. And it's very difficult for some people to accept that. They think that the world should be molded, should be framed, should be depicted in their own image, the way they want to see it. And so we have a long way to go, but as I said, the road is going to be rough, but the fact that it is rough does not mean that we are not going to take the necessary steps to protect the rights of all people, including sexual orientation. I think I will end today's discussion right here, and I thank the caller for raising those issues which he raised. I cannot give him any guarantee as to how those issues are going to be resolved, because courts, especially in Africa, courts are very unpredictable. The absence of a political philosophy aggravates the situation, because you don't know how the judges are thinking. Every decision is ad hoc. Whereas here, at least when I look at the Supreme Court, I know how the liberals, how they think. The four liberals on the Supreme Court, I know what their political philosophy is and how they think. I can predict probably how they are going to decide certain issues. The conservative, too, you can predict, because you know how they reach their decisions. The philosophy of textualism and the originalism can tell you how they are going to vote in certain cases. And incidentally, that's why elections here are very, very important in the United States, because whoever is elected has a chance of changing the composition of the Supreme Court. And now you know why. Because the ultimate decisions are made there, affecting the rights of people, all sorts of rights. They are determined and finally adjudicated upon by the Supreme Court, and the decisions which come out always are the result of the political philosophy of the people who sit on the Supreme Court. As for us in Uganda, I regret to mention this. We do not have a political philosophy. Even the political parties don't have political philosophy. NRM calls itself a multi-ideological political organization, and that's disturbing to me. It's because it's meaningless. I mean, what does it? And that actually gives you an idea of how the judges who are appointed by Museveni think. From the so-called NRM judicial pool, which consists of the so-called people with a multi-ideological philosophy. So my time has come to an end, and I call upon you to tune in next time. This time it is not going to be controversial like homosexuality. It will be looking at specific decisions of the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court of Uganda in interpreting the Constitution of Uganda. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time.